Going for Two Podcast Network. I am Jerry. This is my partner, Jordan. We are the co hosts of the IDP Cover Zero podcast that runs throughout the season. Um, but that is not what we're here for today. We're going to be talking about some off-season team previews, starting with the AFC South today. That's the Houston Texans, Indianapolis Colts, Tennessee Titans, and Jacksonville Jaguars. There'll be a little bit of IDP talk in there. Obviously, these teams are going to need some defensive players as well, but it's not all IDP. So, Jordan, how's everything going today?
I am ready to talk about the best division in football. And it feels a little weird because I was trying to think back, and I don't know the last time we did a non-defensive episode, so I feel like I have to get back into the groove of it.
Yeah, it's been a while. I think it's gonna be a good show. This division has a lot, well, not a lot, but it has a few of the high picks, couple picks in the top five between the teams, and obviously three of the teams didn't make the playoffs at all. A couple of them very underwhelming this year, really rough seasons for them. So let's get into it, starting with the AFC South, the Houston Texans. Head coach D'Amico Ryans was just hired not too long ago, so this is his first year as a head coach in the National Football League, defensive coordinator from the San Francisco 49ers, who were just booted out of the playoffs by the Eagles. They got about 37 million without any moves in cap space. They got 11 draft picks total, barring any trades. They pick at second overall, missing out in Week 18 for the first overall pick by actually beating the Colts. Um, they have the 12th overall pick from Cleveland from that Deshaun Watson trade. They pick in the second round at 33rd overall, third round at 65th overall, and then another pick from Cleveland in the third round at 73rd overall. And then they have one fourth round pick, one fifth round pick, and four sixth round picks coming from different sources. I think a Cleveland one is in there, as well as some other teams, obviously. Um, they really don't have any huge contracts tied up to anybody. They don't have a huge quarterback contract right now. They've been running Davis Mills the past couple of years. They didn't spend a lot of money there. Obviously, they're not into J.J. Watt anymore. They've been out of DeAndre Hopkins for a couple of years, so those big contracts are not on the books. A couple notable free agents that they got this year are going to be Jonathan Owens, defensive back, Jordan Akins, the tight end. We've seen a little bit of him, and Rasheem Green, edge rusher. Why don't you tell us some of the team needs that the Texans need?
Yeah, I mean, they're in an interesting spot, and a lot of people, I think, liked this as a head coach opening, which is kind of interesting, but I think that's because they're kind of at ground zero, so you can only go up from here. But when you do, I mean, it's funny though, because your initial thought is, okay, they need a little bit of everything. I mean, there are some levels where they have some talent. I mean, Laramie Tunsil's been an all-pro tackle. Damian Pierce showed some flashes last year on the defensive side of the ball. Some of their younger players started to look good at the end of the season. Derek Stingley looked good early in the year before he went down once again. Jalen Petrie was really good at safety. So they have some interesting pieces, but yeah, I mean, they don't really need to clear up their cap situation. They're in a good financial spot if they want to be aggressive in free agency. And it's kind of weird when I think about it. So, top few needs: quarterback, edge rusher, offensive line, wide receiver, and obviously, if they draft their quarterback, just surrounding him with playmakers. I was really opposed to them drafting a quarterback in this class because I felt like they needed so much that, let's say they take Bryce Young. I mean, that's a terrible situation for him. Not a lot of weapons. The offensive line ranked in the bottom five all season. But I don't. When I really started to think about it, I don't know if this team's as bad as we think it is. And that sounds crazy, but there's a few reasons. A, I believe in D'Amico Ryans. I think the 49ers really bought into what he did on the defensive side of the ball. The players loved him. He has a lot of energy. He just feels like the kind of guy that's good for a foundational team. He can build a culture there and really build up a system for the future. And when you look at them last season, there was 6 games that they lost by one score. I mean, for a bad team, that's pretty good. I mean, if you have a few of those swing in their favor and you add the tie in there, I mean, they could have been a 6, 7 win team, which, it's not great, but when you look at the talent on their roster, I mean, that feels like it would be outperforming it. So uh, I think they have a lot of heart. They have some interesting young pieces. So this is a really important draft for them. And I think there's either one of two ways you go. You either buy into Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, whoever you decide your quarterback is, Will Levis, if that's the way you want to go as well. But because then you have that number 12 pick too, where you could address the offensive line, you could address the wide receiver position, or do you go the other way and say, listen, we're not going to be that good this year and we don't want to ruin Bryce Young's career. So why don't we? There's a lot of really good edge rushers in this year's class. It's very top heavy. There's, three or four guys that look like they could be all pros. So do you take Jalen Carter, or a guy like that, number 2 overall? DeMeco Ryans is a defensive minded head coach. Give him some weapons to really start scheming on the defensive side of the ball, so he can build that side up. Spend the number 12 pick maybe on another edge rusher, or build up that secondary, or probably, I don't know if there's a linebacker, or you go with an offensive line there, so that guy has a full season under his belt. You spent the higher pick on an edge rusher to build up that defense, and then if you decide to go with a quarterback next year, you're in a position where it's a better, stronger offensive line. The defense is improved. Maybe this receiver class is really deep, so with that high second round pick, maybe they look to add a weapon for the quarterback there. Really, the only contract they probably need to get out of is Brandon Cooks. So maybe they're able to cut that cap, add some more flexibility there. So I don't. It's interesting to me because I think there's multiple ways they can attack this, and they have some flexibility. I mean, if they really buy into Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, whoever it is, then that's probably the direction you go. Take an offensive lineman with the 12th pick, take one of the top 6 or so receivers with your second round pick, and you're at least in a better situation. But to me, it doesn't feel like you bring in D'Amico Ryans and then you go offensive heavy with the first
Mhm.
3 picks that you have. It's just you bring him in to build up that culture and to be a tough-minded, strong defensive team. So it just feels like that hire has them going in the direction of focusing on building the defensive side of the ball. But I mean, it's interesting. It's a clean slate for them, and I think it's a good opportunity. And I don't think, like I said, are they going to make the playoffs next year? No. Would I be surprised if they did the season after? I honestly wouldn't. I think they could win 6 or 7 games this year, be competitive, play tough, and then year 2 under D'Amico Ryans really make a move.
Yeah, I agree with a lot. I was thinking the same things as far as building up that defense because it is a little on the weaker side. They got a couple going into second year players that you already mentioned, Jalen Petrie and Derek Stingley. Definitely need to get an edge rusher, which I think they're going to get with one of those first 2 picks. And I was on the same train as you as far as like not really looking into the quarterback this year. And I think I mentioned to you
Hmm.
one quarterback that I think they should bring in, but what I would do is I would go with one of the edge rushers at that second overall, or see if you could get like see if you could trade down, move back a
Hmm.
couple picks with 112, maybe go wide receiver, or if you don't get the edge at 102, get the edge there. But I was thinking about with the second pick in the second round, the 233. Um, Maybe moving back up into the first round, kind of doing what the Ravens did back in 2018 and
Sure.
like towards the end of the first round, 29, 30, 31, and maybe grabbing a quarterback that slips there. You get the 5th year option because that's really the benefit of having the first round pick is the 5th year
Hmm.
option from him. And then either go into the season with Davis Mills or I'll bring up the other guy that I was going to mention, D'Amico Ryans, hook him back up with Jimmy Garoppolo. See if they could bring him in as a bridge for 1 to 2 years. Um, get that project quarterback or like a might be like an Anthony Richardson or something like that in the end of the first or even at the second or the pick in the second round. Because we already mentioned they got a whole bunch of late round picks. They got 4 6ths. They got the fourth and the fifth or 1/4, 1/5. They can use that ammo to move up, get a third pick in the first round, maybe get their quarterback there, and get bring Jimmy in and not have to use that quarterback as early as 2023. And you mentioned Cooks, and that was another one. He's not a free agent this year. That's why he wasn't really listed on the notable free agents. But I think he's going to be. I think he's going to be cut, save some cap space there,
Mhm.
either cut or traded. He's going to go to. I think he's going to go to a contender, try to get a ring and ride off into the sunset. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned it already about being an intriguing spot to go. I think of all five teams that needed a coach this year, the Texans would have been my top choice because of everything the picks that they got, the money that they got. Not a lot of money tied up into anybody right now that's going to hurt you, and all you really need, like a couple people I talked to were saying that the Texans weren't a good spot to go because you could just, I mean, this is their third coach in what 3 years now.
Yeah.
So it's not like they have any stable jobs there. But I would have like if I was the coach, if I was D'Amico, I'm going into the interview and saying, listen, this is where I want to be, but I want the Dan Campbell treatment. I want you to say that I'm going to be here for 4 years, 3 years, 4 years, and let me build it. Might struggle year one, year two, but let me do my thing. Let me build it, and then see where we are then. Don't fire me after 2 years because you guys aren't taking care of me. So um, I'm excited about the Texans in 2024. I don't know about next year. It's a weak division, but still, I don't think it's weak enough for them to do anything. But I'm definitely excited to see how this team, how D'Amico goes, and how this team can build with the ammo that they got. They're probably going to be picking in the top 10 next year too, and all the money that they got. They have the most money out of everybody. They're going to be talking about today, and by quite a bit too. And no huge contracts coming up, so it's definitely going to be a fun off season for the Texans. Moving on to the second worst team in that division, according to this year, the Indianapolis Colts. As of this recording, they do not have a head coach yet. Um, might still be waiting on what's going on with Philly and Kansas City. Eric Bieniemy's out there. I know the Philly defensive coordinator has been getting a lot of looks too. So see where they decide to go. Jeff Saturday has also been brought up. I don't know if they're going to keep him around, but as of right now, no head coach. They have about 11 million in cap space, 8 total picks. They picked 2 picks later than the Texans at the fourth overall pick, and then 2 picks later in the second round at 35 overall. 379 from Washington. I don't remember what trade that was. 1/4, 1/5, 1/6, and 2/7. So a little bit of day three ammo right there. Notable free agents, they got some good defensive players coming off the books. Yannick Ngakoue, Bobby Okikri, Rodney McLeod, so edge rusher, linebacker, and defensive back. And then Paris Campbell, I threw him on there. He had, I mean, he's been kind of underwhelming since he came into the league, but um, had a decent year this year. Not great, nothing that if you play fantasy, nothing that you're writing home about, but it's definitely got some defensive players that they're going to need to be replaced, whether they bring these guys back or in the draft or free agency. But what do you got for team needs for the Colts?
Well, I will say now that I'm in Indiana, I don't want them to hire Jeff Saturday because I think the entire state would burn down. But if they were going to, I feel like they would want to do it around this time, like sneak it in there while the Super Bowl's still going on. So there's other news going on and people don't talk about it as much. But that's probably the hire that Jim Irsay would like to make. But that head coaching opening will be interesting to see what they fill it with. I it feels like they should go with a young offensive minded coach that will be able to develop whoever their next quarterback is. But a lot of the candidates are kind of the opposite right now. It looks like they have a lot of interest in Wink Martindale and some other defensive minded guys. So it'll be an interesting opening. I just mentioned quarterbacks probably. I mean, we were saying it a year ago that this team was a quarterback away from being a legitimate Super Bowl contender. And I think people forgot that really quickly because the reality is this is just a team that underperformed. They had a lot of injuries last year. The head coaching situation in flux. They weren't very motivated. So I don't think that it's as bad as everybody's making it seem. they're in an interesting spot. Do they consider getting another veteran quarterback and using that fourth overall pick to fill another need, like offensive tackle, edge rusher? You mentioned Paris Campbell being a receiver, but even if he comes back, they really need someone that's not just Michael Pittman. So, those would probably be their top few needs. But at the same time, there has to come a point where you want to stop the quarterback carousel going with veteran guys. But I get this weird feeling they're just going to sign Geno for 3 years and say we're going to compete now with Geno and we don't want to work on developing a quarterback. So, do I think that's the right move? No, they're in a situation with when their offensive line is playing up to standard and they don't have injuries. I mean, this was a top five offensive line a year ago. I mean, and not too much change. So, you draft a guy. They don't have a ton of cap room to really sign anybody, but you make a good pick during the draft to address the offensive line, and I don't think it's a bad situation. The defense was kind of inconsistent last year, but I feel like they need a. This is a team that you either go young with a young head coach, you develop a quarterback, or you take a seasoned head coach that, can help you win now rather than trying to develop a young guy. So it'll be interesting to see what direction they go. And I feel like, though, this is a franchise that's, used to having a franchise quarterback. So it feels like they're going to go in the direction of falling in love with one of these quarterbacks. They probably are in one of the better situations if they want to hop over the Texans to have their choice at quarterback to trade up to number one potentially. That feels like a pretty real possibility, and I like when teams are aggressive, so I wouldn't mind if you want to trade up to number one because Bryce Young's your guy. Go out and do it because you put Bryce Young on this Colts team. I don't know. It's pretty interesting. Could they make the playoffs? I wouldn't bet on it necessarily, but it wouldn't surprise me if they did with a playmaker like that. Draft another young receiver in the draft and fill that need. They'd be an interesting team at least if they went in that direction. And I have a strong suspicion that's what they'll do is get their young quarterback, build around him, and hopefully they make some hires and make some moves to support whoever that is.
Yeah, the one problem I'm seeing with them is, yeah, there's no problem taking a quarterback at 4 overall or jumping up if they can, but the current quarterback on their roster is taking up a lot of cap space.
True.
Matt Ryan, I don't think he has an out this year. I think we talked about this last year too, where he got traded over there after just signing a big contract, and I think we talked about him being stuck there for at least 2 years because of the cap space that he's taken up. Um, Another problem that they're having is Shaq Leonard. I mean, on our IDP show, we've talked about him every single week. Is this the week he's coming back? He looks like he's making progress, and again, he was out again, and he did play a little bit towards the end of the season, but with him having injury concerns, Bobby O'Keefe being a free agent, Zaire Franklin stepped up a lot, but they still need another 2, 3 guys to fill up the middle there on their front seven. It is going to be an interesting offseason. Alec Pierce going into year 2, I think, is going to help any quarterback that he's playing with. Michael Pittman, hopefully I don't think he's going to get moved, but he's been a name that's been brought up in trade rumors
Yeah.
too. I think he's going to end up being a Colt though. Definitely got to fix that offensive line a bit. The interior of the offensive line is good, but they got to fix those tackles. And yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting with them. I think at the second round pick, if they don't get a quarterback whether they do or don't get a quarterback at 104 in the second round, I think that's where they got to get a wide receiver though. They got to get another guy to go on the opposite side of Michael Pittman, and then have Alec Pierce be there too. But they definitely got some weapons. Mo Cox, Kellen Granson, and Jelani Woods as tight ends. So a couple safety blankets if they do decide to pick a high quarterback and give them some weapons to just get the ball out quick. But it's going to be interesting with them. Jonathan Taylor should be coming back soon too.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, a bad strategy for them might be, or a good strategy for them might be trading back from number four, maybe to that 10 range. I mean, based on projections right now, the first offensive line, it's not like last year was a strong class. First offensive lineman isn't really projected to go off the board until 10 or so. So if you can
Mhm.
trade back to 10, grab the first or second best offensive lineman, pick up an additional pick, and then maybe this is a team like you just mentioned with the Texans, where especially since they're kind of tied to Matt Ryan, you could trade up into the back of the first round, draft a quarterback, let him sit the year behind Matt Ryan or see how that situation plays itself out, and then cut ties with Matt Ryan out after this season, and you have that guy waiting in the wings plus a fifth-year option. So it feels like that might not be a bad strategy for them either.
Yeah, that actually that slipped my mind. I was going to say mention that there's not an offensive lineman worth picking at 4, so they shouldn't go that way. Either they go with an edge rusher to replace Yannick. I know they got Quiddy Pay a couple drafts ago, or they get their quarterback there, or move back and see if they can get an OL. But definitely some good. I think there's a couple first round talents on the offensive line, but it's just not that early. I wouldn't go there.
Yeah.
Next team here, Tennessee Titans. They just barely missed out on the playoffs by in week 18. It was between them and the Jacksonville Jags and a win and in. They did not win, so they were out. Mike Vrabel is the coach. He's the longest tenured coach in this division. Been there since 2018. Coach of the year. I think he was a coach of the year last year. I don't think he was nominated this year, but he went through a lot of injuries this year. Henry missed some time. Tannehill missed some time. Um, Cap space is negative 23 million, so they're going to have to make some moves there to get up to zero, and then make some more moves to be able to sign their draft picks and get some free agents in there. They got 6 total picks. Picked 11th overall, 41st in the second round, 72nd in the third round, 1/5, 1/6, 1/7. So no fourth round pick, no picks really from trades or anything. Notable free agents: David Long, the linebacker; Aaron Brewer, interior offensive line; Austin Hooper, tight end; Nate Davis, another IOL; and then Demarcus Walker, edge rusher. What do you got for needs for the Titans?
So they're in an interesting spot as well. I mean, they were 7-3 at one point and kind of blew it. I mean, they had every opportunity, even with those injuries, to make the playoffs. Lost a lot of close games. They need offensive line help. According to Pro Football Focus, this was the worst rated offensive line last year. Worst in the league pass blocking, third worst, I believe, run blocking. So that wasn't giving Derrick Henry much room. Um, it's interesting too, just looking around and reading different articles about what they should do this offseason. No one's really talking about cornerback, which I think is kind of funny because they have talent on paper, but they did allow the most pass yards in the league last year. So it feels like that front seven is really really strong. I mean, they don't need to make a ton of moves there, depending on what happens in free agency. But to me, it feels like offensive line's a top priority. They probably need to add another cornerback. Another weapon, Traylon Burks looked good when he was healthy. Okonkwo at the end, he looked really good. I mean, he flashed a lot of upside at the tight end spot last year. So they have some young, intriguing guys. Good old Bobby Trees is still hanging around there to provide some, I guess, reliability. He's got good hands. He's not anything special, but it still feels like they might need another weapon. But part of the problem is, I mean, they need a quarterback. That's the reality. In 2021, I mean, they blew it. That felt like, to me, the year 21-22 where they could have won the Super Bowl. I mean, they had all of the elements to win the Super Bowl. Their line was playing well. That front seven was on an absolute tear, and then Ryan Tannehill happened. Like, they legitimately felt like they were a quarterback away, and they're in a weird spot now where I don't know if you can say that right now. Their offensive line doesn't look very good. Derrick Henry is aging. They don't have the greatest weapons. This feels like if they don't do or make some sort of major move, that they could fall apart pretty quickly. And I don't think that'll happen because I have a lot of faith in Mike Vrabel, and I think he's a top 10 coach in this league right now. So I don't think they're going to fall apart, but I don't know. I mean, it's going to be tough to move on from Tannehill this year, so you're probably stuck with him another season unless somebody's going to take him off your hands. You got to address that offensive line, which is probably, I mean, they're in a prime position with that 11th pick. They'll get one of the either the best or second best offensive lineman with that pick. So this is a team, probably the first time we'll say it so far, they don't really need the move, in my opinion. Just don't overthink it. Take an offensive lineman. That's your biggest need. You can get one of the top guys there. So that's what I would do with that spot. Um, Probably later in the draft with that second pick, you're gonna look to add another weapon. I already mentioned it, but that's a deep position. Or, maybe I actually was just reading before we hopped on that they were looking at Hendon Hooker from Tennessee pretty quickly. So maybe you draft him in the middle rounds. You let him, he probably won't even be ready for a lot of this season, but if he is, let him develop a little bit behind Ryan Tannehill and evaluate him as a potential option long term. But I don't know. It just feels like if Derrick Henry ages out and finally has a decline this season, I don't know what this team is going to look like, honestly. And I think that it could crash quickly. But it just the past 2 seasons they've had so many injuries and they still stay competitive and they still are a borderline playoff team. So I can't see them crashing, but they need to address that quarterback spot and decide what they're doing long term, fix the offensive line. And I mean, I don't think we have to talk about it if I don't think it's a bad idea to start looking at running backs. This is a really deep running back class. Snag a running back in the mid rounds and start preparing for the end of Derrick Henry. It doesn't even have to be this year. Even if this is a running back that takes over in 2 or 3 years, I don't think it's a bad idea to start thinking and having an insurance policy for Derrick Henry either.
Yeah, if I'm Tennessee, I'm probably going all defensive picks or all offensive picks with this draft.
Yeah.
I think that their defense is fine. You mentioned cornerback, but we got to remember Caleb Farley missed a lot of time last year. Roger McCreary's going into year 2, so he should be better. Christian Fulton, I think, was I mean, he was solid, but he's
Yeah.
another high draft pick that I think between the three of them, they'll be fine. Their secondary is it's solid. I mean, it wasn't good on paper, or it was good on paper. It wasn't good in the stat sheet, but I think they're going to be much better. Maybe you have to replace David Long. That's it as far as linebackers go, but the front seven is good. One of the top 3 defensive tackles in the league in Jeffrey Simmons. Young secondary, all of their corners are top 3 round picks. So as long as they live up to the hype and the potential, then they're gonna have a good secondary. But yeah, I mean, we kind of knew it last year. They were the team that took the chance on Malik Willis, and all the pre-draft stuff last year was Malik Willis is probably going to be one of the first. Well, he was one of the first quarterbacks off the board because there wasn't a lot of quarterbacks taken, but it didn't happen until the fourth round. What round was he? I forgot what round he was.
Third, I think. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he didn't really look that great. Again, I could go to the offensive line as well, but we knew he was raw coming out. It wasn't one of those like if he started from week 1, we knew that Tennessee was probably not going to be in the running for anything. Tannehill he's under contract for another year. He still has a pretty hefty contract, not as hefty as Matt Ryan's is, but he's still pretty hefty in the money department. Maybe he restructures, maybe he's where they find some money, but I think he's going to be on this team in 2023. I think he's going to be starting for this team. But definitely get a wide receiver. And the one thing we haven't talked about at all, well, really haven't talked about many free agents that are out there, or potential free agents outside of the guys that these teams are potentially losing. But the free agent department for wide receivers isn't that great. I don't know if you saw it. Jacoby Myers is up there. I think Marvin Jones is up there, but there's really not a lot of top end talent for wide receivers this year. So I think the draft is going to have everybody have a lot of receivers move up because of that. Like obviously free agency's first. That opens up in when is that? March. That opens up.
Yeah,
And
March
then the
15th.
draft is then the draft is in April, so we're gonna get some vets on the teams before we get some rookies on the teams. But we're gonna see, I think, a lot of the wide receivers are gonna get a little bit of a boost because it's not that deep of. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins is out there as a trade. Arizona was talking about trading him, so you might get some movement there. But I think we're going to see, like, if Tennessee wants to get one, they're going to have to either move up or get one early, maybe at the 41st pick. But by then, a couple could be gone already. We're starting to see a lot more wide receivers going in the first rounds now, getting that fifth-year option with them. Um, but yeah, it's going to be interesting with them as long as they could. I mean, and Mike Vrabel is one of the smartest coaches in the league, so as long as they can build that offense, at least make it compatible enough to put 21, 24 points a game up there. We're talking about the AFC South, so it's a weak division. The only team that's really going to be super competitive is the next team that we're going to talk about. But Tennessee can maybe dethrone them and get back into the playoff hunt with a couple of nice moves on the offensive side of the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, we are going into the Jacksonville Jaguars, the team that won the AFC South because of a Week 18 week win over the Tennessee Titans. Head coach Doug Peterson going into his second year with the Jags. With Philly before, obviously won a Super Bowl with them, but 2022 was when he was hired as the Jacksonville Jags coach. They're a little bit over the spending limit, 32 million, negative 32 million in cap space. I mean, we kind of figured that last year when they went out and gave, I think it was a record-breaking number of money into free agents last year, including Christian Kirk. They have 8 total draft picks this year, 24th overall from where they were eliminated in the playoffs, 56th overall in the second round, 88th overall in the third round, 2 fourths, 1 fifth, and 2 sixths. One, and this team gets a special shout out because they have one addition coming in. I didn't mark it down, but we'll talk about him. Calvin Ridley was traded before the deadline last year. He was serving his year-long suspension. So as long as the suspension isn't pushed out anymore, because the wording in that suspension was at least a year. So as long as it's not pushed out anymore, then we should see him and Trevor Lawrence linking up early in the 2023 season. Some notable free agents they got: Evan Ingram. He signed that one-year deal, had a decent season, one of the better seasons of his career outside of his rookie year. Marvin Jones, wide receiver, Jawan Taylor, offensive tackle, Dwayne Smoot, edge rusher, and Arden Key, another edge rusher. They have a couple edge rushers coming off, but over the past couple of years, they've had a couple edge rushers coming in. So
Mm-hmm.
not as important. You can never have too many edge rushers, but they definitely have bodies there that can definitely take over for guys like Smoot and Key. But I definitely agree with this top team need that we have written down. And why don't you talk about their team needs?
Yeah, I mean, this seems like a pretty clear path for them, honestly. This is a team where they are set up to win a Super Bowl. That sounds crazy to say that about the Jacksonville Jaguars, but especially after the momentum of that playoff game and coming back and just getting, of course you want to make it as far as you can, but just the way they won that game, they played the Chiefs really tough in the second round. I mean, this is a team that's with Doug Peterson is set up for success. So, uh, a lot of it's in the secondary. Their front seven is young and very talented with Josh Allen and Alua Khan, Devin Lloyd, Trayvon Walker. I mean, they're kind of good to go there, but they made some free agent additions in that secondary that really underwhelmed. Shaquille Griffin and Tyson Campbell really weren't great. So this is a team where they really need to address the cornerback position. Safety wise, Rayshon Jenkins is a guy we actually mentioned quite a bit in IDP podcast. He played pretty well last year, so that's a spot, but they could really use somebody next to him as well. So it feels like, even though they don't have a ton of draft capital, if they address, take 2 cornerbacks and a safety, with their 3 of their top 5 or 6 picks, that feels like a smart direction for them to go in. And then they could probably use another lineman as well. Their line's not bad. It got a lot better last year, but they could use another guard. They had a rookie center last year. He started to improve, so I don't know if they necessarily need a center quite yet, unless they don't think he's the long-term option. But definitely a guard. Address that secondary. See what they do with Evan Ingram. It seemed like he's probably going to command maybe too much money for them to be able to afford him. But him and Trevor Lawrence really had a nice connection at the end of the year. And if they're able to somehow bring him back with Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones and Christian Kirk, I mean, there's a lot of weapons with a solid offensive line and ETN back for another season, a strong front seven. I just, this team, it feels like a year from now, we could be talking about them as a team who doesn't really have any weaknesses.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, one thing's for certain, they're gonna get a tight end at some point because I believe we only mentioned Evan Ingram, but the four that they have on the roster, I believe at least three of them are free agents this year. Chris Manhertz and Dan Arnold are also free agents. Um, it's gonna be they're obviously, I'm excited about the Texans offseason. They got a lot of money, they got a lot of picks, they got a lot of needs. So I'm going to be watching them very closely. But the Jags, that's obviously me being a Bills fan. They're a team that we're going to have to look out for now, as creeping up in the AFC and competing with the Bills for playoff spots
Yeah.
and maybe meeting in the playoffs a couple times over the next couple of years. But Trevor Lawrence, we're going to be talking about him a lot. Going for two is going to be talking about him a lot over this offseason. We're going to start when we get into the rankings and stuff like that. He's going to be mentioned in your top tens. He's going to be mentioned in um, around those picks where you took guys like Jalen Hurts last year. You're going to be taking guys like Trevor Lawrence this year to see if they take that jump and that leap. And they can. He doesn't obviously offer the rushing upside that Jalen Hurts offers, but he's going to start getting more touchdowns, more yards to the air, and helping your fantasy team. So on that side of things, he's going to be up there. Calvin Ridley already mentioned. Zay Jones, he's got a connection there with him. Christian Kirk was signed to that big deal. So the offense really doesn't need a lot of help outside of maybe protecting Trevor Lawrence a little bit more and a tight end. Everything else is going to go to the defense. One position that they don't really need to touch is the linebackers between Forsyth, Alukin, and Josh Allen, or not Josh Allen, Devin Lloyd and Trayvon Walker. I think their linebackers are pretty set there. Maybe get some depth pieces, but defensive backs you already mentioned, protecting Trevor Lawrence on the offensive line, and that's about it. I mean, get a tight end, and this team's gonna be rocking. And as long as these other three teams in the division are not improving as much as the Jags have over the last year, this is going to be the Jags division to lose basically for the next couple of years until another guy can come in and compete with Trevor Lawrence for the Texans, Colts, or Titans. They're going to be fun games to watch. They're probably going to get a couple primetime games this year because of making the playoffs and having that good game against the Chiefs if they play. I believe they do play the Chiefs because all the ones play against each other. So that game we might see in prime time, whenever that is. It's going to be a fun season, fun off season, and this is just the start of our team breakdown. Next episode is going to be the NFC South, so that's going to be your Bucks, your Panthers, your Saints, and your missing one. I'm missing one. Bucks, Panthers, Saints. That's what it's going to be.
That's it. That's all that matters. Falcons.
Falcons. Another division that is lacking in the quarterback department. So we're going to be talking a lot about them too. They just lost a 46-year-old quarterback not too long ago. So that's going to be fun to talk about the four teams in that division. It's you don't think it's exciting to talk about these bottom of the barrel teams, but the more that these teams need pieces, the better I think it's going to go. The more fun that we're going to have talking about them and us pretending to be. Now we didn't get too into depth, but us pretending to be GMs here and thinking what can we do to help build these teams up.
That's crazy that every single one of those teams in the next episode could have a new quarterback next year. That's probably, I mean, it's possible. I know your boy Desmond Ritter, but I mean, he might be the old wily vet in that division.
For those four teams could be three from this division that we just talked about. Obviously, two of them have big money issues with their quarterbacks, so maybe not. But out of these four and the next four, we could be talking about seven brand new quarterbacks. Trevor Lawrence being the only
Wow.
one that's sticking around. But yeah, that's going to do it for this episode, the AFC South. Um, if you have any questions or anything, or want to give us your thoughts on what you think these teams should do, reach out at our Twitters. I'm at Jerry Wilkie FM. Jordan is at Dr. Fantasy Sports. Check us out on Facebook. Check us out on Twitter. And that's it. We'll see you guys for the next episode.